r/AskReddit. What are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying? Project Sunshine, where the US government bought remains of dead infants to test for radiation. When they took limbs from them, the parents were never told. One mother wasn't allowed to dress her daughter for her funeral because doctors had removed her legs and didn't want her to find out. Operation Midnight Climax. The government hired sex workers to dose Johns with LSD for research purposes, so to speak. Midnight Climax sounds like a corno. It basically was. CIA involvement in starting the Guatemalan Civil War, which lasted 36 years and led to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people. Hoopsie daisy. Very big hoopsie. One US bomber accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb a short distance from a major US city, can't remember which, but luckily it didn't detonate. Off the coast of Georgia. They still haven't found it. No, they know exactly where it is. It would just be more dangerous to retrieve it than to just leave it alone. It's off the coast of Savannah. Fallout 5 in Savannah confirmed. My hometown was littered with radioactive waste by the federal government as part of the Manhattan Project. Then, we wonder why cancer and thyroid conditions are the norm. In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her and found out her own husband was an undercover agent and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality. Suspiciously, she always has a headache when I propose having mechs. Possible capitalist plot. She's always volunteering to take the children to school on Mondays. Possibility of capitalist indoctrination of our children? Must interrogate them later. Operation Northwoods, a plan for a false flag operation that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Department of Defense in 1962 and given to JFK, who turned it down. The plan called for the CIA to commit terrorist actions against us civilians across the United States and frame Cuba, allowing us the right to invade and oppose Castro and the communist government there. It was declassified and can be found online at the JFK Library. Terrifying that no one knows or seems to care that this was suggested by our government to the president. CIA invested millions in trying to make cat spies, $20 million to be precise. I don't know, the way my friend's cat is staring at me right now, maybe they succeeded. Don't worry, they were only able to successfully make one working spy cat, and it got run over by a truck shortly after deployment. The project was called Acoustic Kitty. When the Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed, it was reported that all 7 astronauts were killed instantly. It was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware, as they plummeted toward the Atlantic Ocean. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled the space program even more than it already was. We looked at this in flight school and pretty much, there's evidence to support that the crew was still running their procedures even after it was obvious skid hit the fan. They didn't die accepting their fate, they died astronauts. That's something to be admired in my opinion. As a part of the Army and CIA's experiments into mind control, they put electrodes into the pleasure centers of dogs' brains. Initially, they wanted hundreds of dogs. They only actually got 10, and of those only a few were implanted. The ones which were would be remote controlled by zapping them and essentially giving them a dose of dopamine when they were facing the right direction. The controllers would stop the dope zap when they wanted the dogs to stop, and then the dogs would reorient themselves until they were facing the correct direction. This meant when the controllers weren't present, the dogs who had been implanted would continually spin in circles, even in their cages, always looking for the direction that gave them that next hit. The program ran out of funding in the mid-60s, and the dogs were destroyed. New Zealand's UFO files are a bit creepy. I was in the library and stumbled across the bound files. There's a lot of assumed crazy people being crazy, but there's also one specific one that stood out from respectable Air Force pilots who were both in the air, conducted mini tests, for example blinking, moving the plane in relation to the object, verifying what he saw with the co-pilot to ensure it wasn't an illusion or his mind. I don't know, just the fact that you'd assume he wasn't crazy creeps me out so much. NZ is not real. Yeah, it's just a prop island for the Lord of the Rings movies. The Nixon administration had a speech prepared for if the moon landing had failed, and it's chilling. Really is chilling. Imagine if they landed on the moon and were unable to lift off again, just having to sit there and stare at Earth as they die. Yikes. Imagine looking up at the moon today and knowing there are 2 bodies up there, staring at 2 corpses every night. Not declassified but leaked. Operation Yellowhammer. The government tried to say it was old, but it had an August date on it. It's the UK government's plan for the eventuality of a no-deal Brexit. Basically, life in the UK would be turned upside down for a few months. Food and medical shortages are expected. The royal family might be evacuated to a safe place. Police will have too much on their hands to investigate crime, etc. Edit. It's not a worst case scenario. It's a realistic assessment. I don't think it's classified, but Project Thor, using a satellite bomber to bomb a city. Imagine a missile or a bomb coming from space, and before you know it, your city is destroyed by a falling missile bomb. It was called Rods from God. Basically, it would have used kinetic energy, no explosives. It would have used a series of 2,000-pound tungsten rods to destroy and vaporize without the radiation of a nuclear bomb. It was only avoided because we signed treaties with the Russians not to weaponize space. Thanks for watching Reddit. Now, be sure to like and subscribe.